Alright, let's take a look at the inside of this 5-speed once we got the gear set out. We've got the shift forks, the shift linkage at the bottom assembled here. Kind of figured out what the idea was now that we've got the gears out of the way, see exactly how they made this work. We can see the shift forks in here in their neutral position. This is the one out here for 5th. And it's kind of interesting. They've harvested standard parts in order to make extra shift forks here. You can see here's a 3rd, 4th, actually the one out of the box. I just had to replace both of these. They both showed some wear, probably having come out of a used 4-speed box. But you can see here that the 3rd, 4th fork to make 5th is simply you ground off all this excess on the side here and trim it down. You can see the location of the pin. And they just flip it backward, and now it does the job for 5th gear. What's interesting here is they've changed the design slightly. There's usually a roll pin where the 3rd, 4th shift fork moves along with the shaft. Here what they've done is they've just removed the roll pin, allowing the shaft to float inside of it. The gears are actually controlled by the lugs in here, and so they get away with letting this fork free float on the shaft. That lets 5th be pinned to the shaft so that they can control 5th with an extra lug installed down here. It's kind of hard to show with the forks in place, but the real problem with making this thing shift, and let's go ahead and knock the shift forks out. Basically this shaft now is free floating, so I can just pull it right out. The forks just sort of fall down in the box. Let's scoop out the 1st, 2nd, the 3rd, 4th, and have a look at the real problem we face here. Hopefully we got enough light. Again, in the neutral position, there's this collar machined onto the kind of the sleeve that the inner shift rod works in. The standard box, you have half a collar machined here because really it only has these shift forks on this side to be concerned with. This modification entails a full collar so that they can engage the mechanism they've added in on this side over here for 5th. And so we can see the problem. It's such a tight set of gates, and they really didn't pay that much attention to the detail here of making this work. I think I can see room for improvement, but let's see if we can show the gear positions. 1st, 2nd. Alright, that's pretty straightforward. But then trying to get into the 3rd, 4th gate without hooking on the 5th gate is nearly impossible when finessing it right down here. You can see there it went into the 1st, 2nd again. I'm able to do it sometimes by just sort of there. So right there is what it took to get into the 3rd, 4th. And it is so tight. There's 4th, there's 3rd. But what we're up against here, it's hard to show through this with this lighting, but this lug on this side is dragging hard on this cam, whatever you want to call that little metal bracket there, that's supposed to be what engages 5th. 5th rides in a little pin right here in that little slider. You can see it's just hard to see there with the limited amount of lighting and space. But right now this gate is so difficult to manipulate. It's very stiff pulling back into 3rd because literally the lug on this side is dragging hard on the underside of this tab here that's there to let 5th work. So what I'm hoping to do is to pull this off, maybe finesse the underside of this to where these lugs have some room to work. There's really no reason for them to almost interfere. I'm hoping to maybe cut some angles on here, some bevels that allow all this stuff to slide around better so that it has a much better feel from the shifter. And then we'll see about optimizing the shift forks and the rest of it. Some details I just don't like about this, you know, this reverse rod is supposed to ride on a hard, kind of a rivet lug that rides in there on this machined little flat down here in the casting. They just removed it. So now this fork is pretty sloppy. Moves up and down. It doesn't have that little support base here. So reverse is really vague, and this whole shaft of these little fork arms on here is just very sloppy. This should be very precision shimmed. Otherwise you've got no hope of grabbing a smooth, clean gate when these things wobble up and down, you know, 20 thousandths. how are you supposed to catch a gate that's got, I don't even think this has a couple of thousandth of clearance here between being in the third, fourth gate and engaging the fifth gate. So it needs work. We'll see what we can do to finesse it. Maybe make some improvements that'll help a lot of people that are frustrated with these gearboxes.